As I travel around teaching so often, I get these wonderful thank you cards, and I guess I should be writing the thank you card myself. But check this out. This is actually a machine paper pieced little sewing machine and a thank you card, and I've got a bunch of awesome ways that you can make your very own cards. Let's get started. Thanks again, Judy, for this awesome card. I told you I loved it, and I really meant it, and you really inspired me here. So I went over to Missouri Star Quilt Company, and I got myself a package of these ready-made card blanks that are from C&T Publishing and from Carol Doak, who is awesome paper piecer teacher. And when you get your package, you get 4 different colors of the cards and their envelopes. But there's also a little mini pattern inside, right? So you could use that and have some fun. A couple of ideas, and I got a bunch I want to share with you, so I'm going to kind of go quick at the beginning. Also, you know, dear friend Violet Craft came over and she paper pieced the gnarly needle, and we have a tutorial on that with a free printable. So if you want to download that and do it, of course you'll need to reduce it for the size you're using, because your card blank is going to have this window in it. So this window you may want to use for your eye spyglass to make sure you have what you want inside of the area. So that's something we're going to start thinking about as we talk about these card blanks. That being said, as a matter of fact, another thing I really wanted to try to do, something that I love, is applique, and I thought this would be a really fun little one where I could take and make a basically little beach scene with a palm tree. But I was thinking about, how can I use up my scraps? How can I go back to that bin full of stuff laying around the studio? So I did a tutorial on a folded fabric yoga mat. That's what this was from. So these fabric strips are actually those fabric strips there in the background, right? And then I just simply took a piece of black fabric and a little bit of the fusible web, and I just drew a little palm tree on there, cut it out, and appliqued it down. Now, while we have these open inside, you can kind of start to see what the background is going to look like. We can pretty much leave these unfinished, although you could always leave a note on the outside of your card to let your receiver know that there was a block that could be reused, recycled in there. But let me show you it this way. You can see on the card blanks there's actually some removable tape. There's some double-sided tape in there. So that's how I've started to adhere the block. I want to make sure the block fits in my window correctly. And so you do need to consider orientation, because the cards will work like this horizontally, or they can work vertically there for you, right? So this was a real fun, easy way to work through some of my scraps. And I also, though, was thinking about, wouldn't mini piecing be super fun to try? And I haven't done much with mini piecing, but just standard style quilt construction. But what I wanted to think about is, how do we get down to a place where we don't have so much bulk in our seam allowance? What does that mean, Rob? You are going a little caffeinated today. So look at this little micro checkerboard I'm working on, right? So this thing is small. It started with 3/4 inch strips of fabric. And that was one of the keys, was actually to use my fabrics in much longer strips, so they were easier to hold in these manly fingers, right? So what I did is I cut little strip sets like this, and also when I pressed them, I tried to press them so that one fabric would lay flat and the other ones would fold in, so that when I'm doing my checkerboard, it's going to make life a little bit easier later. Let me see if I can show you the back of that as I'm starting to press it out. So there's all kinds of little fun strips you can do. But one of the things when you're going to do this accurate piecing within your cards, you really want your lines of your patchwork to line up to your card. So I want to take a moment here and add a little extra fabric around my block, even though it already fit in my window, because I'm going to add some fabric here to help me square this into the card so that I can mount it from the back without having to look at it from the front. So mini piecing techniques, a couple things we want to talk about. Let's use a finer needle, maybe like a 70 size needle. That's smaller than the 80s we're used to. We can use a finer thread, although I'm just using my Aurifil cotton right now, but that's one of the tricks we can do. And then the other thing is I often sew big and trim down. So right now I'm just adding in barrier, meaning that this already fits in my window. I'm just adding in extra, so I do not need to trim this down right now. However, if I was still adding on parts that were going to fit in the window, once I get this sewn in place, I'm going to come back in here with my ruler, and I'm going to line things up with like my 1/2 inch now, and I'm going to cut that, trim that down, so when I put on that 1/4 inch seam allowance, everything is going to be a little bit less bulky. And actually I said 1/4 inch seam allowance, but that's not altogether true, because I want to use the smallest seam allowance possible too. So I'm kind of just sewing right on the inside edge of my foot. And I'm just gonna go ahead and treat this like a, kind of like a log cabin, meaning I'm sewing over the seams I just created. And I'm right on the very edge of my foot there. And I like to back stitch, and I've shortened my stitch length up a little bit too. I'm down to about a 2. And I'm just gonna take that real quick. And this part doesn't need to be all that accurate, so I can cut it wide for the moment, like that. And then I'm just gonna bring it over here. And I only need to do 2 sides because I'm just trying to match into that card blank itself. But you certainly could do 4 sides if you wanted to, especially if you wanted to go ahead and utilize this for a gift that someone would reuse the card itself, or reuse the quilt square is what I'm trying to say. Okay, let me make sure my iron's good and hot right now down there. Okay, we're gonna need that in a second. Let's get these parts out of our way. Now, while the iron's heating up, let me grab my lapel stick, because we're also gonna need that, right? Because this thing, oh, and by the way, I'm sorry about the misspelling. It's supposed to be lapel stick on there. I'm talking to the marketing team about that. I think we need to make it look, you know, a little bit more official for our man sewing fans. Oh, good, I stalled long enough. Old Panasonic's nice and warm. And I'm going to press this now and trim it square as I'm working. Because remember, we're thinking about micro piecing, micro seams. We want it to look really nice and really small. Okay, little steam if I need. Let's bring this back over here. And I'm just going to go ahead and trim this down. Again, I want the blue to fit in that seam allowance and in that card window. Okay, so now what I was trying to show you is I wanted to use that extra fabric to fit right in here like this, because there's a couple of ways to finish our cards off. As I said earlier, this is a self-adhesive tape, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull off one side, maybe. Okay, now I'm going to come over here and I'm kind of visually centering this in at the moment, but I am setting and pressing, and what I'm looking at is the edge here and the edge here to try to make sure it runs parallel over to the other side. Pull off this card blank this way. There. And I'm going to flatten my card and give a little bit of a stretch like that. Now before I seal it, of course, I want to flip it over and make sure it looks beautifully square. I love it. But I also, again, remember, if you want to reuse it, we probably could put these parts right back on so that they could open it up easily. I don't want somebody to get back in there. I don't want somebody to be able to use this, and I wanted to show you how to use your glue stick. So I'm going to glue here. I'm gluing over the fabric so that fabric now bonds to the paper on the other side as well. Take it easy, Rob. You're getting a little rowdy there. Okay, and I can even go to the outside edge there. Now, the C&T logo is designed to go on the back of the card. One piece of the paper side is a little bit bigger than the other, so I'm going to put the non-logoed side down here, like that, so that when the card is finished, the C&T logo is on the outside, because this piece is made a little bit smaller to fit on the interior like that. Okay, now I have to admit, one of my very, very favorite ways to make the cards though, is where I just find something in fabric itself that is so easy to use, right? So look at this. These are parts that were left from my Tutti Frutti tutorial, and these were a really fun Colorworks, if I remember the brand of fabric that came out, and just awesome patchwork, right? So now what I want to do is kind of come in here and think to myself, what can I do? What can I spy to find in that window that would look pretty cool? I like that. That looks pretty modern if you ask me. I'm thinking about the size of this window. I'm looking at that little pinwheel point right there. Now, let's be good quilters. We need to have a half of an inch, at least a quarter inch all the way around our seam allowance. So I'm getting in the habit now with these kinds of parts. I'm going to add at least a half there. I still don't know what size the window was, so I can easily come back here and measure. It's a 3-inch window on this card, so now I'm going to come over here 3.5 or 4 inches even if I wanted to. Let's cut big. We're going to trim down after we quilt it. Okay. Thinking about that line down there, and I'm looking up here. Where am I going to be at? Now what I'm going to do get rid of that stuff. I'm gonna take just a basic piece of batting. I'm gonna take it right here, and I'm gonna sew across these lines onto the batting, so we don't need our edge guide in our way. We can just rotate it. I'm just gonna drop this down, and I'm just gonna sew right off the edges, thinking about the longest seams first. I'm not worrying about pulling thread up or anything like that. And let's respect it as if it was really patchwork. So I'm starting in the middle because that's where that seam was. So I need to lock that stitch in. Okay, let's get a couple of these diagonals and we will literally be done. Let's stop at that corner because that's where the print work stopped there. So I'm not sure if you can see, I might have matched my threads a little bit too nice. Like a turquoise thread would have been pretty cool there too, I think. We're gonna get the rest of that batting out of the way. Easy, don't go so fast you get hurt though. And then I guess what we should be thinking about and talking about one last time in here is just a little bit about that reminder about the bulk management in our fabric pieces, or even if you're doing embroidery, whatever you're putting into your card window, you don't want it to get real thick. So even on those little checkerboards I was building, then I didn't go back and add the batting because of the seam allowance. There's no seam allowance in this, so it's okay to add the batting. I'm hoping that makes some sense. So we're gonna go ahead and look at this like this, and I like to just give myself a little quick reveal first to see what it looks like. Flop it over, and that's gonna be a pretty terrific design if you ask me. So at any rate, I wanna thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for following along on the tutorials, but thank you so much for being thoughtful folks out there and sending these great cards and teaching me what you want me to teach all of you right here at Man Sewing. Thanks for being a Man Sewing fan. It's great to have you out there encouraging me to create fantastic new content. If you've missed any of the videos, we've got links for you here and here. And while you're checking those out, make sure you're subscribed. We don't want you to miss any of the action.